The dust-filled horizon swallowed the setting sun as Gwendolyn Frost clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. At 18 years old, she had already weathered more hardship than most folks twice her age. Tonight, however, would mark the lowest point in her young life. Her father, Jeremiah Frost, a man more devoted to the bottle than to his own flesh and blood, was bartering her away like livestock at the edge of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878. "Ain't worth more than this," Jeremiah slurred, holding up the amber bottle of Callaway's best whiskey. "Take her or leave her." Gwen's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the muddy ground beneath her worn boots. How had it come to this? Since her mother's passing 3 winters ago, her father had descended into a bottomless pit of drunkenness and gambling debts. Now, he'd reached rock bottom, selling his only daughter to a stranger passing through town. The saloon keeper, a greasy-haired man named Otto Wilkins, scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Seems mighty cheap for a girl, Frost. Even one as skinny as yours." Gwen felt sick. She wasn't merchandise to be haggled over. Yet here she stood, powerless as the 2 men discussed her worth as casually as they might a horse or a parcel of land. "Look at her," her father spat. "Ain't much meat on them bones. Can't cook worth a damn neither. 1 bottle's generous." Otto chuckled, exposing tobacco-stained teeth. "I reckon she'll fetch a good price at Miss Loretta's place in Deadwood. The miners there ain't particular about cooking skills." The realization of what awaited her struck Gwen like a physical blow. She'd heard whispers about Miss Loretta's establishment, a brothel where women were worked until they were used up or dead. She stepped backward, ready to flee into the night, when a deep voice cut through the evening air. "I'll pay double." 3 heads turned toward the newcomer. A tall figure stepped out of the shadows, his face partially obscured by the brim of a worn Stetson. Dust clung to his long coat, and silver spurs clinked softly as he approached. "2 bottles of Callaway's finest for the girl," the stranger said, his voice calm but commanding. Jeremiah Frost's bloodshot eyes widened with greed. "Well now, seems my girl's worth more than I reckoned." "2 bottles and not a drop more," the stranger said, producing the whiskey from his saddlebag. Otto Wilkins scowled. "Now, see here, I was in the middle of a transaction." "Your transaction is finished," the stranger interrupted, his hand resting casually near the revolver at his hip. Something in his stance made Otto take a step back. Jeremiah snatched the bottles, hardly looking at his daughter, as he tucked them under his arm. "She's all yours then, mister. Do what you want with her." The stranger stepped forward, placing himself between Gwen and the 2 men. "She owes no man a thing," he said, his voice hard as iron. "Not you, not me, not anyone. Remember that." Gwen looked up, finally seeing her purchaser clearly in the dying light. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 25 or so, with a weathered face that spoke of long days under the harsh western sun. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, met hers briefly before returning to the men. "This business is concluded," he stated flatly. "Move along." Otto grumbled but retreated toward the saloon. Jeremiah lingered only long enough to work the cork from one of the bottles before stumbling away, leaving Gwen alone with the stranger who had just bought her freedom, or perhaps traded her into a different kind of bondage. "Name's Nathan Irving," he said, once the others were out of earshot. "I've got a camp set up just outside town. You're welcome to share my fire tonight. Then tomorrow I can take you wherever you want to go." Gwen stared at him suspiciously. "Why would you help me? What do you want in return?" Nathan's expression remained neutral. "Nothing. Like I said, you owe no man a thing, not even me." "Men always want something," Gwen replied bitterly. "I'm not most men, Miss Frost," Nathan said. He gestured toward the edge of town. "You can come with me, or you can make your own way. The choice is yours. But night's falling fast, and these parts aren't kind to a woman alone after dark." Gwen weighed her options. She had no money, no family, besides the father who had just sold her, and nowhere to go. Whatever this man's true intentions, she stood a better chance with him than alone on the streets of Redemption Creek. "I'll come with you," she said finally, "but only until morning." Nathan nodded once, then turned and began walking toward the outskirts of town. Gwen followed, keeping a careful distance between them. The night had grown cold, and she hugged herself tightly against the chill. "Here," Nathan said, shrugging out of his coat without breaking stride. He held it out to her. "Take it. You're shaking." Gwen hesitated before accepting the garment. It was warm from his body and smelled of leather, tobacco, and something distinctly masculine. She draped it over her shoulders, immediately grateful for the protection against the wind. "Thank you," she murmured. Nathan merely nodded and continued walking. His campsite was modest but well-ordered, a small fire already built, a coffee pot resting at its edge, and a bedroll spread nearby. A sturdy-looking bay horse was tethered to a tree, munching contentedly on some grass. "That's Copper," Nathan said, noticing her gaze. "Best horse a man could ask for." Gwen stood awkwardly at the edge of the firelight as Nathan stoked the flames. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a fallen log he'd positioned as a bench. "Coffee's still hot." She perched on the log, watching warily as he poured a steaming cup and handed it to her. The warmth of the tin mug felt good against her cold fingers. "I've got some beans and bacon," Nathan said, rummaging through his saddlebags. "Not much, but it'll fill your belly." "Why are you doing this?" Gwen asked again, unable to comprehend his kindness. Nathan paused, a tin of beans in his hand. In the firelight, she could see the sharp angles of his face, the slight growth of beard on his jaw, and the weariness in his eyes. "I had a sister once," he said after a long moment. "Sarah. She was sold to pay my father's debts when she was 16. I was 14 and couldn't stop it." He looked into the fire, his expression distant. "I've been looking for her ever since. Never found her." The simple honesty in his words struck Gwen. She took a sip of the bitter coffee, letting it warm her from the inside. "I'm sorry about your sister," she said softly. Nathan nodded once, then set about preparing their simple meal. They ate in silence, the crackling of the fire and the occasional whicker from Copper the only sounds disturbing the night. When they'd finished, Nathan took the dishes to a nearby stream to rinse them. "You can take the bedroll," he said upon his return. "I'll keep watch." Gwen shook her head. "I can't take your bed." "You can and you will," Nathan insisted. "I've slept on harder ground than this." Too exhausted to argue, Gwen settled onto the bedroll, pulling Nathan's coat tighter around her. Despite her fear and uncertainty, the rhythmic sound of the fire and the quiet assurance of Nathan's presence lulled her into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in years. The dawn broke cold and clear, with frost silvering the grass around their campsite. Gwen awoke to the smell of coffee and found Nathan already up, tending to Copper and preparing a breakfast of hardtack and dried fruit. "Morning," he said, handing her a cup of coffee. "Sleep well?" Gwen nodded, surprised to realize she had. "Better than I have in a long time." "Good." Nathan gestured toward a small bundle beside her. "Found some things in my pack that might fit you. Nothing fancy, but cleaner than what you've got." Gwen opened the bundle to find a faded flannel shirt and a pair of trousers that had been patched at the knees. "These are men's clothes," she said, raising an eyebrow. "They're practical clothes," Nathan replied. "Where we're heading, a dress won't do you any favors." "And where exactly are we heading?" Gwen asked, setting the clothes aside. Nathan took a sip of his coffee. "That depends on you. Where do you want to go?" The question caught Gwen off guard. No one had asked what she wanted in a very long time. I don't know," she admitted. "I've never been anywhere but Redemption Creek." Nathan studied her for a moment. "I'm heading to Silverton. Got a small claim there that needs working. It's about a week's ride from here. You're welcome to come that far. Then decide what you want to do." Gwen considered his offer. A week's journey with this stranger, who had already shown her more kindness than she'd known in years, or strike out on her own, with nothing but the clothes on her back. "Why would you want me along?" she asked. Nathan shrugged. "Company's not bad on a long ride. Besides, seems like you could use a fresh start somewhere your father can't find you." The mention of her father sent a chill through Gwen that had nothing to do with the morning air. "He won't come looking," she said quietly. "Not as long as he has his whiskey." Something dark flickered across Nathan's face. "No decent father sells his daughter for drink." "My father hasn't been decent for a long time," Gwen replied. They finished their breakfast in silence. After Gwen had changed into the clothes Nathan provided, surprisingly comfortable once she'd rolled up the sleeves and pant legs they packed up the camp. Nathan saddled Copper, securing their meager supplies. "We'll have to ride double," he said, patting the horse's neck. "Copper's strong, but we'll need to stop often to let him rest." Gwen eyed the saddle nervously. She'd never ridden a horse before, let alone pressed up against a man she barely knew. Nathan seemed to read her thoughts. "I know it's not proper, but there's not much choice until we can get you a mount of your own." "I can't ride," Gwen confessed. "You'll learn," Nathan said simply. He mounted Copper in one fluid motion, then extended his hand down to her. "Just hold on to me. I won't let you fall." Hesitantly, Gwen took his hand and allowed herself to be pulled up behind him. She settled awkwardly onto the back of the saddle, unsure where to put her hands. "Arms around my waist," Nathan instructed. "It's the only way you'll stay on when we hit rough ground." Gwen complied, her face burning as she linked her arms around Nathan's solid torso. She could feel the warmth of him through his shirt, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," she replied. With a gentle click of his tongue, Nathan urged Copper forward, and they set out from Redemption Creek, leaving behind the only life Gwen had ever known. The first day of travel passed largely in silence. Gwen was too focused on staying mounted to engage in conversation, and Nathan seemed content with the quiet. They stopped at midday to rest Copper and share a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, then continued until the sun began to sink toward the horizon. The landscape changed gradually as they rode, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills dotted with pinyon pines and junipers. When Nathan finally called a halt for the day, they were in a small clearing beside a bubbling stream, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods. "We'll camp here tonight," he announced, dismounting smoothly before helping Gwen down. Her legs buckled as her feet hit the ground, unaccustomed to so many hours in the saddle. Nathan caught her before she could fall, his hands strong on her upper arms. "First day's the hardest," he said, a hint of sympathy in his voice. "You'll toughen up soon enough." Gwen winced as she straightened. "I hope so. I feel like I've been beaten from hip to knee." A ghost of a smile crossed Nathan's face. "Ride often enough, and you'll forget you ever felt that way." They set up camp with efficient movements, Nathan handling the heavier tasks, while Gwen collected firewood and filled their canteens from the stream. As the sun disappeared and the stars emerged, they sat beside the fire, eating beans and salt pork. "Why Silverton?" Gwen asked, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. Nathan poked at the fire with a stick. "Heard there was silver to be found. Bought a claim from a man heading back east. Figured it was worth a try." "You're a miner?" Gwen asked, trying to reconcile this image with the man before her. "I've been a lot of things," Nathan replied. "Cowhand, trail cook, scout for a wagon train. Even rode shotgun for a stage company for a spell." He shrugged. "A man does what he needs to out here." "And what about before?" Gwen pressed. "Before the West, I mean." Nathan was quiet for so long that Gwen thought he might not answer. Finally he said, "I was a farmer's son in Ohio. After my sister was taken and my mother died, my father drank himself to death. I headed west at 17 and never looked back." The matter-of-fact way he described such tragedy struck Gwen deeply. Here was someone who understood loss as she did, who had rebuilt his life from the shattered pieces of what came before. "I'm sorry," she said, echoing her words from the previous night. "About all of it." Nathan nodded, accepting her sympathy without comment. "What about you?" he asked after a moment. "What was your life like before yesterday?" Gwen stared into the fire, gathering her thoughts. "My mother was kind," she began softly. "She taught me to read and write, to sew and cook. She had dreams of me becoming a schoolteacher someday." A sad smile touched her lips. "She died of fever 3 winters ago. After that, my father changed. Or maybe he was always that way, and my mother just shielded me from it." She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "He started drinking more, gambling away what little money we had. Sometimes he'd disappear for days, then come home mean as a wounded wolf. I learned to stay out of his way." "No other family?" Nathan asked. Gwen shook her head. "None that I know of. My mother had a sister back east somewhere, but we lost touch years ago." Nathan tossed his stick into the fire. "Then it's a good thing you're heading to Silverton, fresh start and all that." Gwen watched the stick catch flame. "Is that what you found out here? A fresh start?" "Something like that," Nathan replied. He stood, stretching his tall frame. "Get some sleep. We've got another long day tomorrow." As on the previous night, Nathan insisted Gwen take the bedroll while he kept watch. This time, however, she was too exhausted to argue. Within minutes of lying down, she was fast asleep. The next 5 days fell into a pattern. They would rise with the sun, eat a quick breakfast, and ride until midday. After resting Copper and having a simple meal, they would continue until evening, when they'd make camp beside water if they could find it. Nathan taught Gwen basic horsemanship, showing her how to guide Copper with pressure from her legs and subtle shifts in weight. By the third day, she was riding with more confidence, though the constant proximity to Nathan still made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't entirely understand. Their conversations grew easier as the miles passed. Nathan told stories of the places he'd been and the people he'd met, colorful tales of cattle drives and frontier towns, of Apache warriors and Mexican vaqueros. Gwen found herself laughing at his dry humor and hanging on every word of his adventures. In turn, she shared memories of her mother and the books they'd read together, of the small joys she'd found even in her difficult life. She discovered that Nathan was surprisingly well-read for a drifter, and they passed pleasant hours discussing everything from Shakespeare to Twain. On the 6th day of their journey, the landscape changed dramatically. The rolling hills gave way to rugged mountains, with peaks that seemed to scrape the sky. The trail narrowed and steepened, forcing them to slow their pace. "Silverton's in a high valley just beyond that ridge," Nathan said, pointing to a distant mountain pass. "We should reach it by tomorrow afternoon." Gwen felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. What would happen when they reached their destination? Would Nathan simply leave her to fend for herself, his obligation fulfilled? The thought troubled her more than she wanted to admit. "What will you do once we reach town?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Head to my claim, see what's there," Nathan replied. "Might take a few days in town first to get supplies." "And me?" Gwen pressed. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Silverton's got a hotel that needs help, last I heard. Owner's wife died last year, and he's been struggling to keep up. Might be a place for you there, if you're interested." Gwen nodded, both relieved and disappointed. It was a practical suggestion, the kind of help she should be grateful for. Yet some part of her had hoped, what? That this taciturn cowboy might want her to stay with him? The very idea was ridiculous. They made camp that night in a protected hollow. The air was cooler at this elevation, and Gwen shivered despite the fire and Nathan's coat, which he'd insisted she keep. "Here," Nathan said, noticing her discomfort. He rummaged in his pack and produced a blanket, draping it around her shoulders. His fingers brushed against her neck as he did so, and she felt a jolt of warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket. "Thank you," she murmured, looking up at him. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither moved. Something shifted in Nathan's gaze, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by his usual reserve. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice gruff. "Big day tomorrow." Gwen lay awake long after Nathan had taken up his usual position against a nearby tree. Tomorrow they would reach Silverton, and whatever this strange journey had been would come to an end. The thought left an emptiness in her chest that she couldn't explain. Morning brought a light drizzle that soaked through their clothes and made the trail slick and treacherous. Nathan led Copper carefully, choosing each step with deliberate caution. By midday they had reached the mountain pass, and Gwen gasped at the view that greeted them. Below stretched a valley cradled by towering mountains, their slopes thick with pine and aspen. A river snaked through the center, and clustered along its banks was a town larger than Redemption Creek, with buildings of wood and stone. Smoke curled from chimneys, and even from this distance Gwen could make out the movement of people and wagons. "Silverton," Nathan announced, a note of pride in his voice. "It's beautiful," Gwen breathed. They began their descent, the trail winding back and forth down the mountainside. As they drew closer to the town, Gwen could see details that weren't visible from above a church with a white steeple, a substantial-looking hotel, several saloons, and what appeared to be a proper general store. It was early afternoon when they rode down the main street. People looked up curiously at the newcomers, particularly at Gwen in her men's clothing, perched behind Nathan on his horse. "We'll get a room at the hotel," Nathan said over his shoulder. "You can rest while I see about that job." He reined Copper to a halt in front of a 3-story building, with a sign reading, "Silverton Grand Hotel." It was the largest structure Gwen had seen since leaving Redemption Creek, with broad windows and a wide porch fronting the street. Nathan dismounted first, then helped Gwen down. Her legs were steadier now after days in the saddle, but she still appreciated his strong hands at her waist. A stable boy appeared to take charge of Copper, and Nathan passed the reins over with a few murmured instructions and a coin. The hotel lobby was surprisingly elegant, with polished wooden floors, a grand staircase, and a gleaming reception desk. A middle-aged man with mutton chop whiskers looked up as they entered, his eyebrows rising at the sight of Gwen's attire. "Afternoon," Nathan greeted him. "Need a room for the lady." The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "We have a nice single room available. That'll be $1 per night in advance." Nathan placed the money on the counter. "We heard you might be looking for help around the place." The clerk's expression changed, interest replacing skepticism. "You heard right. Been running this place alone since my Martha passed. Could use a woman's touch, especially with cleaning the rooms and such." He looked Gwen over more carefully. "You have experience in housekeeping, miss?" Before Gwen could answer, Nathan spoke. "Miss Frost is educated and hardworking. She can read, write, and keep accounts besides handling household duties. You'd be fortunate to have her." The clerk, Mr. Henderson, as he introduced himself, seemed impressed by this endorsement. "Well now, that does sound promising. I could offer $3 a week, plus room and board." It was a generous offer, and Gwen knew it. She glanced at Nathan, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," she said, finding her voice. "I'd be grateful for the opportunity." "Excellent," the clerk beamed. "You can start tomorrow. For now, let's get you settled." He rang a small bell, and a young boy appeared to carry their meager belongings upstairs. The room was simple but clean, with a brass bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the street. For Gwen, who had spent the last week sleeping on the ground, it seemed luxurious. "It's perfect," she said, turning to Nathan, who stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Good," he replied. "I'll let you get settled then. I need to register my claim at the assayer's office before it closes." Gwen felt a sudden panic at the thought of him leaving. Will you come back? Before you head to your claim, I mean." Nathan hesitated. "I'll be around town for a few days, getting supplies and such." It wasn't quite the answer she was hoping for, but Gwen nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Thank you. For everything." Nathan touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "You're welcome, Miss Frost." And then he was gone, his footsteps receding down the hallway. Gwen sat heavily on the bed, suddenly exhausted. She'd survived. She had shelter, the promise of work, and a new beginning in this mountain town. So, why did she feel this hollow ache in her chest? Because Nathan Irving had saved her not just from her father, but from a life of degradation and misery. He had treated her with respect and kindness when no one else would. And somewhere along their journey, she had begun to care for him in ways that went beyond simple gratitude. With a sigh, Gwen began to unpack the few possessions she had acquired during their journey, the clothes Nathan had given her, a small knife he'd taught her to use, and a handkerchief that had somehow migrated from his pocket to hers. Such a meager collection to start a new life, yet more than she'd had a week ago. A knock at the door startled her. Thinking it might be Nathan returned, she hurried to answer, only to find a young woman bearing towels and a pitcher of hot water. "Mr. Henderson thought you might like to freshen up," the girl explained with a friendly smile. "I'm Betsy, one of the maids." "Thank you," Gwen said, accepting the items. "I'm Gwendolyn Frost." Betsy's eyes widened. "You're the new help Mr. Henderson just hired. I heard you rode in with that handsome cowboy." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Are you two, you know?" Gwen felt her face flush. "No, he just helped me get here, that's all." Betsy looked disappointed, but recovered quickly. "Well, if you need anything, just ring the bell by your bed. Supper's served in the dining room at 6. With a cheerful wave, she departed, leaving Gwen to her ablutions. The hot water felt heavenly after days of cold stream baths. Gwen washed away the dust of the trail, then dressed in her cleanest set of borrowed clothes. Her stomach reminded her that it had been hours since she'd eaten, but she was reluctant to venture downstairs alone. Just as she was gathering her courage, another knock sounded at her door. This time, it was Nathan, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. "Thought you might be hungry," he said. "Dining room's open if you'd like to join me." Relief flooded through Gwen. "I'd like that very much." They descended to the hotel's dining room, a pleasant space with white tablecloths and actual china plates. Luxuries Gwen hadn't experienced in years. A middle-aged waitress showed them to a table, eyeing them curiously but saying nothing about Gwen's unusual attire. "We'll need to get you some proper clothes," Nathan commented as they studied the menu. "Can't have you working in a hotel dressed like a ranch hand." Gwen smoothed a hand over the borrowed shirt. "These have served me well enough." "They have," Nathan agreed. "But a lady should have ladies' things." The simple statement warmed Gwen unexpectedly. It had been a long time since anyone had thought of her as a lady deserving of nice things. They ordered beefsteak with potatoes and green beans, the most substantial meal Gwen had seen in months. As they ate, Nathan told her about his visit to the assayer's office. "My claim's about 3 miles outside town, up along Pine Creek," he explained. "Previous owner started a tunnel, but didn't get far. Assayer says the rock samples look promising." "When will you go out there?" Gwen asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Day after tomorrow, I think," Nathan replied. "Need to get supplies first, mining tools, food stores, that sort of thing." Gwen nodded, cutting her steak into smaller pieces to hide her disappointment. 2 more days, then he would be gone. She should be grateful for that much. "Mr. Henderson seems nice," she commented, changing the subject. "I start work tomorrow." "He's got a good reputation in town," Nathan agreed. "Treats his people fair, from what I hear." Their conversation drifted to safer topics. The town, the other guests at the hotel, the changing weather. When they'd finished eating, Nathan insisted on paying the bill, waving away Gwen's protests. "Consider it a welcome to Silverton dinner," he said with one of his rare smiles. They walked together to the staircase. Where they would part ways, Gwen to her room, Nathan to wherever he was staying. "Thank you for dinner," Gwen said, suddenly shy. "My pleasure," Nathan replied. He hesitated, then added, "I was thinking of looking at those clothes for you tomorrow. Thought you might want to come along, make sure they fit proper." Gwen's heart lifted. "I'd like that." Nathan nodded. "Meet you in the lobby at 9 then." "9 it is," Gwen agreed, trying not to sound too eager. "Good night, Miss Frost," Nathan said, touching his hat. "Good night, Mr. Irving," Gwen replied, watching as he turned and walked away. Back in her room, Gwen found herself too restless to sleep, despite the comfort of a real bed. She crossed to the window, gazing out at the moonlit town. Silverton was quiet at this hour, with only a few lanterns glowing in windows and the occasional figure moving along the boardwalks. It seemed peaceful, this place that was to be her new home. Her thoughts turned to Nathan. Tomorrow they would shop for clothes, and the day after that, he would leave for his claim. Would she see him again after that? Would he visit town occasionally, perhaps stop by the hotel to check on her? Or would he simply fade from her life, his duty to her discharged? The thought made her chest ache. In the space of a week, Nathan Irving had become the most important person in her world, her rescuer, her teacher, her friend. Perhaps even something more, though she hardly dared to name the feelings that stirred when she thought of him. With a sigh, Gwen turned from the window and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. For tonight, she would simply be grateful for the safety and comfort she had found. Morning arrived with clear skies and bright sunshine streaming through Gwen's window. She dressed carefully in her borrowed clothes, doing her best to make them presentable. At precisely 9 o'clock, she made her way to the lobby where Nathan was already waiting, hat in hand. "Morning," he greeted her with a nod. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Gwen admitted with a smile. "A real bed makes quite a difference." Something in Nathan's expression softened. "Glad to hear it. Ready to find those clothes?" They stepped out onto Silverton's main street, which was bustling with morning activity. Wagons rattled past, men hurried to and from the assayer's office, and women went about their shopping, giving Gwen curious glances as they passed. "Mercantile's this way," Nathan said, guiding her with a gentle hand at the small of her back. The store was impressive, stocked with everything from mining equipment to fancy ribbons. Nathan led Gwen to the section with women's ready-made clothing, then stepped back. "Pick what you need," he said. "My treat." Gwen shook her head. "I can't let you do that. You've already done too much." "Consider it an investment in your future," Nathan replied firmly. "Besides, I'm the one who gave you those clothes that don't fit. Only fair, I replace them." Seeing that he wouldn't be swayed, Gwen turned her attention to the selection. Under the watchful eye of the shopkeeper's wife, she chose 2 serviceable work dresses, a shirtwaist and skirt, sturdy boots, and the necessary undergarments. Blushing as Nathan politely turned away while these were wrapped. The total came to more than Gwen had seen in months, but Nathan paid without comment. He also insisted on adding a warm shawl and a bar of lavender soap, saying practically that Wyoming winters were cold and everyone deserved something nice. With their purchases bundled in brown paper, they stepped back onto the street. Nathan had other errands, mining supplies to purchase, provisions to arrange, but he walked Gwen back to the hotel first. "Will you be all right on your own today?" he asked as they reached the entrance. Gwen nodded, touched by his concern. "Mr. Henderson is expecting me to start work this morning. I'll be kept busy enough." "Good," Nathan said, seeming relieved. "I'll stop by this evening, if that's all right. See how your first day went." "I'd like that," Gwen replied, perhaps too quickly. Nathan touched the brim of his hat and turned to leave, but Gwen called after him. "Nathan?" He paused, looking back at her. It was the first time she'd used his given name, without the formal Mr. preceding it. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the clothes, for everything." Something flickered in his blue eyes, a warmth that made Gwen's heart beat faster. "You're welcome, Gwendolyn." The sound of her name on his lips stayed with her as she went inside to begin her new position at the Silverton Grand Hotel. Mr. Henderson proved to be a fair employer, if somewhat disorganized after months of running the hotel alone. He showed Gwen the ropes how to prepare rooms for guests, manage the linen inventory, and assist in the dining room when needed. The work was hard but straightforward, and Gwen threw herself into it with enthusiasm. By evening, she was tired but satisfied. She had changed into one of her new dresses, a simple blue calico that fit her far better than Nathan's borrowed clothes, and was helping to serve dinner when Nathan appeared in the dining room. He paused in the doorway, his eyes finding her immediately. Something in his expression made Gwen's cheeks warm as she approached him. "Evening," he greeted her, his gaze taking in her transformed appearance. "You look different." "A good different, I hope," Gwen replied with a small smile. "Very good," Nathan confirmed, a hint of color touching his tanned face. "Are you free to join me for dinner, or are you working?" Mr. Henderson, overhearing the exchange, waved her off. "Go on, Miss Frost. You've earned your supper." Grateful, Gwen allowed Nathan to lead her to a table. As they sat, she noticed he had cleaned up again, his dark hair still damp from washing. "How was your first day?" he asked once they'd ordered. Gwen told him about her new responsibilities, the other staff she'd met, and the various guests staying at the hotel. Nathan listened attentively, asking questions and seeming genuinely interested in her experiences. "And you?" she asked when she'd run out of stories. "Did you find everything you needed?" Nathan nodded. "Got most of my supplies, hired a wagon to take them out to the claim tomorrow." He hesitated, then added, "I was thinking of heading out mid-morning." Gwen felt her heart sink but maintained her smile. "So soon?" "Need to get settled before winter sets in," Nathan explained. "There's a cabin on the property, but it'll need work." "Of course," Gwen said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Will you, that is, do you think you'll come into town often?" Nathan's eyes met hers across the table. "I reckon I'll need supplies now and then, and there are other reasons to visit." The warmth in his gaze gave Gwen hope. "I'd like to see your claim sometime," she ventured, "if that wouldn't be an imposition." "It's rough country out there," Nathan warned. "Not much comfort." "I'm tougher than I look," Gwen reminded him. "I did survive a week on the trail with you after all." A genuine smile spread across Nathan's face, transforming his features. "That you did, Miss Frost, that you did." They lingered over dinner, their conversation flowing more easily than ever before. When they finally rose to leave, The dining room had emptied, and Mr. Henderson was discreetly sweeping up nearby. "I should let you rest," Nathan said as they reached the bottom of the staircase. "You've had a long day." "Will I see you before you leave tomorrow?" Gwen asked, unable to keep the question inside. Nathan nodded. "I'll stop by to say goodbye." The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Gwen wanted to ask him to stay, to tell him that the thought of him leaving made her heart ache. Instead, she simply said, "Good night, Nathan." "Good night, Gwendolyn," he replied softly. She climbed the stairs slowly, turning once to find him still standing there, watching her go. The intensity in his gaze followed her all the way to her room. Morning came too quickly. Gwen rose early, donning her new dress and pinning her hair more carefully than usual. She had breakfast duty in the hotel dining room, but her eyes kept straying to the door, watching for Nathan's arrival. It was nearly 10 o'clock when he finally appeared, dressed for travel in his worn coat and hat. He caught her eye across the room, and Gwen quickly excused herself to join him. "You're leaving," she said, stating the obvious to fill the awkward silence between them. "Wagon's loaded and waiting," Nathan confirmed. He shifted his weight, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to make sure you're settled before I go, that you're happy here." Gwen nodded. "Mr. Henderson is kind, and the work is good. I'll be fine." "I know you will," Nathan said with conviction. "You're stronger than you know, Gwendolyn Frost." Coming from him, the words felt like more than empty flattery. Nathan had seen her at her lowest point, had watched her rebuild herself day by day on their journey. If he believed in her strength, perhaps she could believe in it too. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You owe no man a thing," Nathan reminded her, echoing his words from that first night. "Not even me. Remember that." Gwen felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Will you come to town soon?" "As soon as I can," Nathan promised. He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to write to you, if that's all right. Let you know how things are going at the claim." Joy bloomed in Gwen's chest. "I'd like that very much." Nathan nodded, seeming pleased by her response. "Well then," he said, reaching for his hat, "I should be going." "Be careful out there," Gwen urged. "Those mountains can be dangerous." "I always am," Nathan assured her with a slight smile. He paused, looking as though he wanted to say more, then simply tipped his hat. "Until next time, Miss Frost." Gwen watched him walk away, his tall figure moving confidently through the hotel lobby and out the front door. Only when he had disappeared from sight did she allow a single tear to fall. "He'll be back, dear," said a voice beside her. Gwen turned to find Mr. Henderson watching her with kindly eyes. Men like that always come back for what matters to them. Gwen wiped away the tear, hoping her employer was right. "There's work to be done," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I should get to it." The days following Nathan's departure settled into a routine. Gwen threw herself into her duties at the hotel, learning quickly and earning Mr. Henderson's praise. The other staff, Betsy the maid, cook, and old Thomas, who handled the heavier work, accepted her readily into their small family. Silverton itself began to feel less strange. Gwen made acquaintances at the mercantile and the bakery, at church on Sundays, and among the regular guests at the hotel. She saved her wages carefully, opening an account at the town's small bank. The first letter from Nathan arrived 2 weeks after his departure. Gwen recognized his bold handwriting on the envelope and retreated to her room to read it privately. "Dear Miss Frost, I hope this letter finds you well and settled in your new position. The cabin at the claim is now weathertight, though far from comfortable by hotel standards. I've begun extending the tunnel the previous owner started and have found promising indications of silver. Nothing to get excited about yet, but enough to keep digging. The country here is beautiful but lonely. I find myself thinking of our conversations by the campfire and missing your company more than I expected. Perhaps when the trail is less treacherous, you might consider visiting. I could show you the mountains from a view even more spectacular than the pass we crossed. Until then, I remain, your friend, Nathan Irving." Gwen read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and tucking it into her dresser drawer. That night, she wrote back, telling Nathan about her life at the hotel, the people she'd met, and the changing season in Silverton. She ended her letter with a similar sentiment to his own, that she missed their conversations and would welcome the chance to see his claim when circumstances allowed. 2 more letters came over the next month, each slightly more personal than the last. Nathan described his daily life, the progress of his mining efforts, and the wildlife that visited his cabin. He mentioned missing not just her conversation now, but her smile, the sound of her laughter, even the way she hummed softly when she thought no one was listening. In return, Gwen shared more of herself in each response, her hopes for the future, memories of her mother, and her growing affection for Silverton and its people. She never directly addressed the feelings that bloomed stronger with each letter, but they colored every word she wrote. Winter settled over the mountains with a vengeance. Heavy snow blocked the passes, and travel became dangerous even for short distances. Gwen worried about Nathan alone at his claim, though his letters assured her he had ample supplies and a warm cabin. The hotel grew quieter as fewer travelers braved the winter conditions. Mr. Henderson used the slower season to make repairs and improvements, keeping the staff busy. Gwen added bookkeeping to her duties, discovering she had a talent for numbers that pleased her employer greatly. It was during a particularly fierce blizzard in early January that Gwen was working late in the hotel office, reconciling the monthly accounts. The lobby was empty, most guests having retired early, and Mr. Henderson had gone to visit his sister in a neighboring town before the storm hit. The sound of the front door opening, bringing with it a blast of frigid air, drew Gwen from the office. She gasped at the sight that greeted her, a tall figure covered in snow, stamping boots on the entryway rug. "Nathan?" she called uncertainly. He looked up, pushing back his snow-covered hat, and Gwen's heart leapt at the sight of his face, leaner than she remembered, but wonderfully familiar. "Gwendolyn," he said, his voice rough from the cold. She hurried forward, propriety forgotten in her concern. "What are you doing out in this weather? You could have frozen to death?" "Had to come to town for supplies," Nathan explained, shrugging off his heavy coat. "Storm hit faster than expected. Couldn't make it back to the claim." "You need to get warm," Gwen insisted, taking his coat and hanging it near the fire. "Sit down before you fall down." Nathan complied, sinking into a chair by the hearth. His face was wind-burned, his hands red with cold. Without thinking, Gwen took those hands in hers, rubbing warmth back into them. "You're a sight for sore eyes," Nathan said softly, watching her work. Gwen looked up, suddenly aware of their proximity. "So are you," she admitted. "I was beginning to think the snow would keep you away until spring." "Would have taken more than snow to do that," Nathan replied, his eyes holding hers. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken words. Then practical matters reasserted themselves, and Gwen straightened. "You'll need a room," she said, moving toward the reception desk. "And something hot to eat. Cook's gone home, but I can manage soup and bread." "Don't go to any trouble," Nathan protested, rising to follow her. "It's no trouble," Gwen assured him, selecting a key from the rack. "Room 204 is vacant and has the best fireplace. Go up and get settled while I see to some food." Nathan hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." Gwen busied herself in the kitchen, warming the soup cook had left for the next day, and slicing fresh bread. She arranged everything on a tray, adding a pot of coffee and a slice of apple pie she'd been saving for her own supper. When she reached room 204, balancing the tray carefully, she found the door ajar. She knocked lightly with her foot, then entered to find Nathan stoking the fire into life. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "Starving," Nathan admitted, turning to face her. He had removed his outer layers and stood in his shirt sleeves, his hair still damp from melted snow. "Join me." Gwen hesitated only briefly before sitting in the chair he pulled out for her. They shared the simple meal, their conversation flowing easily, as though the months apart had been mere days. "How long will you stay in town?" Gwen asked as they finished the pie. Nathan considered. "Depends on the weather. Can't risk the trail back if the snow keeps up." "Then I hope it snows for a week," Gwen said with a smile, only half joking. Nathan's expression softened. "I've missed you, Gwendolyn. More than I should, probably." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Gwen's chest. "I've missed you too," she confessed. "Your letters helped, but it's not the same as having you here." Nathan reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I keep thinking about that day in Redemption Creek," he said quietly. how close you came to a very different fate. Gwen shuddered at the memory. I try not to think about it. I think about it often, Nathan continued, about what might have happened if I hadn't been there, about how different my life would be now if I hadn't found you. Gwen turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining. Why did you help me that day? The truth. Nathan was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. I told you about my sister, he finally said, how she was sold to pay my father's debts. What I didn't tell you was that I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to prevent such a thing happening to another woman, I would take it, whatever the cost. He met her eyes, his gaze intense. But that was only part of it. The moment I saw you standing there, trying so hard to be brave even when your world was falling apart, something changed inside me. I couldn't have walked away if I'd tried. Gwen felt tears welling in her eyes. I'm glad you didn't. So am I, Nathan said fervently. These months at the claim, I've had a lot of time to think about what I want, what matters. I kept telling myself that you were better off here, building a new life without some rough minor complicating things. And what did you conclude? Gwen asked, hardly daring to breathe. Nathan's hand tightened on hers. That I want to be part of that new life, if you'll have me. That I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you, Gwendolyn Frost. Joy bloomed in Gwen's chest, so intense it was almost painful. I feel the same way, she whispered. I think I have since those nights by the campfire, when you told me stories of your travels and listened to mine as though they mattered. They did matter, Nathan insisted. You matter more than anything. He rose from his chair, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. Standing before her, he looked down into her face with such tenderness that Gwen felt her heart might burst. I'm not a wealthy man, he said softly. The claim may never produce the silver I hope for, but everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you want it. I don't need wealth, Gwen replied, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. I just need you. Nathan's free hand came up to cup her cheek. May I kiss you, Gwendolyn? In answer, Gwen rose on her tiptoes, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened, years of loneliness and months of longing pouring into the connection between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he murmured. Have for longer than I've been willing to admit. I love you too, Gwen replied, the words feeling natural and right. Since somewhere between Redemption Creek and Silverton, I think. Nathan smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. That was quite a journey. The best kind, Gwen agreed. The kind that changes your life. They stood together by the fire, talking late into the night. Nathan spoke of his plans for the claim, his hopes that with proper equipment and time, it would yield enough silver to build a comfortable life. Gwen shared her dreams of perhaps opening a small school in Silverton someday, using the education her mother had given her to help others. We could do both, Nathan suggested. Live at the claim in good weather, in town during the winters. Build something that's ours. Ours, Gwen repeated, loving the sound of the word. I'd like that. The blizzard continued for 3 days, keeping Nathan in Silverton. They spent every possible moment together, sharing meals, walking through the snow-covered town when the weather permitted, sitting by the fire in the hotel lobby talking for hours. Mr. Henderson, upon his return, observed their obvious attachment with approval. Knew he'd be back, the hotelier told Gwen with a wink. Told you men like that always come back for what matters. On the morning of the 4th day, the storm finally broke, revealing a world transformed by snow. Nathan stood at the hotel entrance, reluctant to leave, but knowing the trail to his claim would soon be passable. I have to check on the cabin, he explained, holding Gwen's hands in his. Make sure the roof held under all that snow. I know, Gwen assured him, though her heart ached at the thought of his departure. You'll come back when you can? As soon as the trail allows, Nathan promised. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I want you to have this. It was my mother's. He pressed something into her palm, a simple gold band with a small pearl set into it. Gwen looked up at him in surprise. Nathan, I can't... It's not a proposal, he clarified quickly. Not yet. That deserves to be done proper. with a preacher nearby and my feet not half frozen. His smile turned serious. "But I want you to know my intentions, Gwendolyn. I mean to make you my wife, if you'll have me." Tears sprang to Gwen's eyes. "I'll have you," she whispered. "Whenever you ask, however you ask, my answer will be yes." Nathan's expression was one of wonder and joy. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her fingers gently. "Keep this safe for me, then, until I can put it on your finger properly." "I will," Gwen promised, closing her hand around the ring. Their goodbye kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of all that was to come. Gwen stood in the doorway of the hotel, watching as Nathan mounted Copper and rode slowly down the snowy street. At the edge of town, he turned back, raising his hand in farewell. Gwen waved in return, the ring warm in her palm. Spring came late to the mountains that year, but when it arrived, it brought with it a burst of new life and new beginnings. Nathan visited Silverton regularly once the trails cleared, sometimes staying a night or two at the hotel, other times just coming for the day to bring Gwen wildflowers and news of his progress at the claim. The silver mine was showing promise nothing spectacular, but steady enough to provide a modest income. With Mr. Henderson's blessing, Gwen began teaching reading and arithmetic to several of the town's children, 3 afternoons a week. Her classroom, a corner of the hotel dining room, after lunch was cleared away. On a perfect day in late May, with the mountains still capped in snow but wildflowers carpeting the valley, Nathan took Gwen to see his claim for the first time. The cabin was small but sturdy, with a new addition he'd built through the winter. Inside, she found unexpectedly homey touches curtains at the windows, bookshelves filled with volumes he'd acquired in town, even a small piano he'd somehow transported up the mountain trail. "It needs a woman's touch," Nathan said as he showed her around. "Your touch, specifically." Outside, he led her to a spot overlooking the valley, where the view stretched for miles in every direction. There, with the spring sun warming their faces, Nathan Irving dropped to one knee before Gwendolyn Frost. "You've made me believe in second chances," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "In the possibility of building something good from broken pieces. I love you, Gwendolyn, and I want to spend my life showing you just how much." He reached into his pocket and withdrew her mother's ring, the same one he'd given her to keep safe all those months ago. "Gwendolyn Frost, will you marry me?" "Yes," Gwen answered without hesitation, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, with all my heart." Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to take her in his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that felt like coming home. They were married in Silverton's small church 2 weeks later, with Mr. Henderson giving the bride away and half the town in attendance. Gwen wore a dress of ivory silk ordered specially from Denver, and Nathan a new suit that still couldn't quite hide the rugged cowboy beneath. "I, Nathan, take you, Gwendolyn, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Gwen repeated the same words, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan's kiss was gentle yet possessive, a promise of all they would share in the years to come. The reception at the Silverton Grand Hotel lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than Gwen had ever seen in one place. As the celebration wound down, Nathan took his bride's hand and led her outside to where Copper waited, adorned with ribbons and flowers for the occasion. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Irving?" he asked, his eyes shining in the lamplight. Gwen looked up at the man who had saved her in so many ways, who had paid twice the price her father demanded, who had told her she owed no man a thing, who had shown her what true love meant through his actions and his heart. "I've been home since the moment I met you," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him once more. Nathan lifted her easily onto Copper's back, then mounted behind her. With a wave to their friends and well-wishers, they rode out of Silverton toward their cabin in the mountains, toward the future they would build together. As they followed the moonlit trail, Gwen leaned back against her husband's solid chest, feeling his arms secure around her. From that terrible night in Redemption Creek to this perfect moment, their journey had been unexpected and often difficult, but every step had led them here, to each other, to love. "Happy?" Nathan asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Gwen turned her face toward his, seeing in his eyes all the promise of tomorrow. More than I ever dreamed possible. The years that followed proved the truth of those words. The Irving claim eventually yielded enough silver to provide a comfortable living, though never the fabulous wealth that drew so many to the mining towns of Colorado. Gwen's small school grew into a proper establishment, with its own building in Silverton and a reputation for excellence that spread throughout the county. They divided their time between the mountain cabin during the warmer months and a small house in town during the harsh winters. Their family grew with the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Nathan's long-lost sister, followed 2 years later by a son they called William. On the 10th anniversary of the day Nathan had first seen Gwen in Redemption Creek, they stood together on the porch of their cabin, watching their children play in the meadow below. Nathan's arm circled Gwen's waist, pulling her close against his side. "Any regrets?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Gwen smiled up at the man, who had transformed her life with a simple act of kindness and courage. "Not one," she replied. "Every hardship led me to you. How could I regret that?" Nathan's eyes, still that same striking blue, though now crinkled at the corners from years of laughter and mountain sun, held hers with the same intensity as when they'd first met. "I never did find my sister," he said reflectively, "but I found you instead, found a family, a purpose, a home. And I found freedom," Gwen added softly, "not just from my father, but to become who I was meant to be." The sound of their children's laughter floated up from the meadow, a reminder of all they had built together from such unlikely beginnings. Nathan turned Gwen in his arms, cradling her face between his calloused hands. "I love you, Gwendolyn Irving," he said simply. "More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow." "And I love you," Gwen replied, rising on tiptoe to meet his kiss. "My cowboy who paid twice and asked for nothing." Their lips met as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A perfect ending to another day in the life they had created, a life born from an act of redemption in a dusty frontier town, nurtured by love, and built on the foundation of respect and freedom that Nathan had given Gwen from the very beginning. For in the end, the greatest gift he had given her was not rescue from her father's cruelty, but the knowledge that she owed no man a thing, that her worth was not measured in bottles of whiskey or dollars or any coin of the realm, but in the strength of her spirit and the capacity of her heart. And in return, she had given Nathan the home and family he had searched for since losing his sister so many years before. Together, they had transformed tragedy into triumph, pain into joy, and two broken pasts into one beautiful shared future. As twilight settled over their mountain home, Nathan and Gwen called their children in for supper, their voices blending in the evening air, a harmony that had begun with a single act of kindness on a desperate night and had grown into a lifetime of love.